to shed some light on events in Syria on today's show, what is going on and why. The trumpet's focus on Germany here is unique. Here's what Trumpet Editor-in-Chief Gerald Flurry said on his Key of David program earlier in the year.
But Iran is losing Syria to Germany. It's happening even right now. They're losing them, and especially the people. And this is going to be a real shock to the world. You can be sure of that.
So why this focus on Germany? Well, I want to help you understand and take you through some basic Bible prophecies that inform that. Because again, this is not a major focus you get from anywhere else. So as you watch what happens in Germany and watch what happens in Syria, you can watch this book come to life. So a key prophecy for understanding Iran and what is happening here and Germany and the Middle East is Daniel chapter 11. Now, Daniel chapter 11 is part of one long prophecy. Included in this prophecy is even Alexander the Great. He was forecast in the Bible before his time. It was prophesied that he would die young. It was prophesied what would happen after him. But in this part of Daniel chapter 11, we can note it says in verse 40, and at the time of the end. So even though there is some ancient history included in this prophecy, that we can see this prophecy and your Bible has already been proven true, and you can read this passage and you can compare it with the history books. You can even go back and look at the history of Daniel and the book of Daniel itself and see why it could not have been written after Alexander the Great, why it had to have been written before then. You can see and prove your Bible from this passage. There's also prophecy here for the time of the end. You see this confirmed in chapter 12 and verse 1, where it says, "At that time shall Michael stand up, the great prince which stands for the children of your people, and there shall be a time of trouble, such as there never was since there was a nation, even to that same time." So this is a time for the crisis at the close, for the end times. Daniel chapter 11 introduces us to two major powers that it focuses on, the king of the north and the king of the south. And we're introduced to these shortly after the death of Alexander the Great. And so this passage prophesied that Alexander the Great would die young and that his kingdom would be split in four. And one of these would become the king of the north, and that refers to the Seleucid kingdom in Syria. So there was a successor kingdom to Alexander the Great that ruled a lot of the Middle East. From Syria, it's called the king of the north. And then the king of the south refers to the Ptolemaic kingdom in Egypt that dominated a lot of the area as well. So ancient history, king of the north dominating the Middle East from Syria, king of the south from Egypt. But when we get to verse 40, it says, "At the time of the end," and we're still talking about the king of the north and the king of the south. Who could they be at this point? I mean, the king of the Seleucid kingdom in Syria is long, long gone. Well, the Bible gives us the information that we need to work that out. One major clue is that in 65 BC, the Roman general Pompey the Great conquered the Seleucid kingdom of Syria, conquered the king of the north. So from this point on, the Roman Empire, and that takes on its role of the king of the north. And other parts of Daniel and parts of the book of Revelation prophesy that this Roman Empire would continue in some fashion, that it would fall and others would come along and resurrect this. And sure enough, we see people resurrecting the Roman Empire, the Holy Roman Empire. You see Napoleons come along and market themselves as new Caesars and leading a new Roman Empire. So it's this European resurrection of the Holy Roman Empire that is king of the north. And we can also see this by putting Daniel chapter 11 alongside other Bible prophecies. This is key. Mr. Armstrong talked about the Bible as like a jigsaw puzzle. The book of Isaiah says we have to go here a little, there a little. To get the full picture, we have to go to quite a few other passages. So if we look, for example, in staying with Daniel 11, we can see verse 41. It says, "He shall enter into the glorious land." So this king of the north, he comes and he conquers Israel. Verse 45 says, "He shall plant the tabernacle of his palace between the seas in the glorious holy mountain." So this king of the north conquers the Jewish state of Israel in the Middle East, and it conquers Jerusalem. Well, we can look at other scriptural passages that tell us who does that. And those other passages identify this power as Assyria. And we've shown how this is modern day Germany. They also identify it as the beast power in the book of Revelation. this resurrection of the Holy Roman Empire. So we can put these other scriptures side by side and gain more clarity that way. It's also worth noting it mentions this king of the north coming in. He says he shall enter into the glorious lands. And the Hebrew there implies a peaceful entry, not a conquest. So he comes in peacefully, but it's a false peace. He comes in under false pretenses and then takes over. And you can see that somewhat from the passage here. You can see that earlier in the chapter, it talks about a type of this modern day leader coming in through treachery. Daniel chapter 8 talks about that as well, and a leader that uses peace to destroy many. And then there's other passages, for example, in the book of Ezekiel, that describe Assyria doing the same thing. Assyria conquered the northern tribes of Israel anciently, but Ezekiel was writing long after that happened. He's prophesying of another conquest. So we can put these side by side and see, well, all of this matches that the king of the north refers to this European power led by Germany, this beast power that is Assyria in Bible prophecy. Well, who is the king of the south? Well, this passage itself allows us to eliminate a lot of possibilities. Egypt is mentioned separately. So it's not Egypt. The same with Libya, the same with Ethiopia. That gets rid of a great many possibilities. The Bible has a whole lot of prophecies about Edom. There's an entire book, the book of Obadiah, that talks about Edom, which is Turkey. And they're very different from what is prophesied for the king of the south. So it can't be Turkey. So we can check off a lot of these other powers. And very quickly, if we're looking at events revolving around the Middle East and revolving around Israel, there aren't a whole lot of alternatives left, but radical Islam led by Iran. And you see that in this focus in Jerusalem, in this passage. This is a conflict that revolves around the glorious land, the land of Judea. And it revolves around Jerusalem. Who else is there in the Middle East that is to the south of the king of the north, that is not one of these other powers, that is focused on conquering Jerusalem? Very quickly, we can narrow that down to Iran and radical Islam. So those are these major powers in this conflict. How does Syria play in? Well, for that, we need to introduce another passage, and that is in Psalm 83. Psalm 83 has been called a mysterious alliance. It prophesies of a group of nations that is prophesied to attack Israel, but there's no record of this happening in history. What is this talking about? Well, it's not mentioned in history because this is prophecy. It has to be Bible prophecy. It hasn't happened in history. And you can even see that there's some more hints within this passage that this is prophetic. Verse 3, for example, talks about them taking crafty counsels and consulted against your hidden ones. There's a secrecy to this. There's a crafty counsels, could be translated conspired against. In the same way that the king of the north in Daniel chapter 11 enters the Holy Land under false pretenses. Well, there's crafty counsels. This is an alliance that comes in under false pretenses. And then this ties into a whole host of other passages. We can see also, if we jump ahead to the end of this alliance, Assyria is mentioned as well. In verse 8, it says, Asher also is joined with them. So this includes the king of the north, Germany. Asher, Assyria in prophetic language, is joined with this alliance. So this fits in perfectly with what is prophesied in Daniel chapter 11. And even you can look at the countries that are mentioned here in Psalm 83. None of the countries in Daniel 11 mentioned as being allied with the king of the south are mentioned in this alliance. These are two separate alliances facing off. And Daniel chapter 11 tells us, well, you have the king of the south, and then when the king of the north takes out the king of the south, he also takes out Egypt and Libya and Ethiopia. And the implication is that you have the king of the south, and allied to the king of the south is Egypt, Libya, and Ethiopia. And so none of those nations are mentioned in Psalm 83. These fit hand in glove. You have a Psalm 83 alliance led by Germany, and they have regional partners in the Middle East, and they face off against the king of the south, against radical Islam led by Iran, and they have powers that are aligned with them. So these two prophecies fit together perfectly. Verse 5 again says, they have consulted together with one consent. They're confederate against you. It's a bit of a conspiracy. They're working together secretly to take out Israel in the Middle East. And there's more to it than just Israel in the Middle East as well. But I just want to focus today on, well, how does Syria tie into this? So verse 6 starts to list these allies for us. It says the tabernacle of Edom, the Ishmaelites of Moab, and the Hagarenes. So there's lots of different groups here that we could get into. Edom, I mentioned already. Well, that is Turkey. The Ishmaelites, the Arabs themselves claim to be descended from Ishmael, another son of Abraham. So you've got the Turks, you've got the Arabs, you've got that kind of anti-Iranian coalition that we can see already present within the Middle East. And then it says, and the Hagarenes. And Hagarenes just means descendants of Hagar. Hagar being the mother of Ishmael, this other woman that Abraham and Sarah brought into their marriage so that they could have a child. So in some ways, well, Hagar, the mother of Ishmael, Hagarenes, Ishmaelites, that's kind of the same thing, isn't it? Descendants of Ishmael, well, the descendants of Hagar are also descendants of Ishmael. We could look quickly at 1 Chronicles chapter 5 and verse 9 and 10. And here that mentions, it's telling us where various descendants of Reuben lived. And then verse 10, in the days of Saul, they made war with the Hagarites. So they were fighting these groups, the Hagarites. I mean, that's basically the same meaning as Hagarenes, the descendants of Hagar. And these are it's describing people living in northeastern Israel, kind of the Golan Heights area in modern political language, and around the east of the Sea of Galilee. They're the ones that are butting up against the Hagarites. So these Hagarites, anciently, they're a branch of Arabs, a branch of the descendants of Ishmael that lived in what is modern Syria today. For whatever reason, that name of Hagar stuck with them. And we see this in later history as well. So when Assyria was in this area, they record a tribe that they called the Hagaranu, living in this area that is now Syria. Again, the descendants of Hagar. So there's this group of Arabs that have the name Hagar kind of stamped on them that have lived around that area of Syria over quite a long period of time. They were there in the time of Saul, in the time of Assyria, hundreds of years later. That's the region of the world that this is talking about. And so it's because of that mention of the Hagarites in Psalm chapter 83 that we're expecting Syria to be allied with Germany. And Psalm 83 has been a guiding prophecy for so much of what we've been seeing in the Middle East recently. I mean, if you look, the next verse talks about Gabel, and then further on it says Tyre. Gabel and Tyre, these are two Phoenician cities. Gabel is better known as Byblos. Both of these cities are in what is now today Lebanon. This is why Mr. Flurry said, well, watch for Lebanon to break with Iran and Hezbollah's power in Lebanon to be broken, because they're going to be aligned with Europe and with Germany and not with Iran. The same where it says the Philistines. I mean, if you look at where the Philistines lived anciently, it's in Gaza. And so Mr. Flurry said, well, ultimately Gaza is going to end up siding with this European power. So we're watching Psalm 83 play out before our eyes. And even we've seen in history examples of this kind of trend. And when Germany was getting more involved in the Middle East in World War I, they looked for regional partners they could work with. They drew very close to Turkey. Turkey was part of the German alliance in World War I, and they tried to use Turkey to reach out beyond to various other Arab states. In World War II, they worked most famously with the Mufti of Jerusalem to try and reach out to other Muslims that they could use to fight against Britain in that case. So there is historical precedent and examples of where we've seen this kind of thing happen before, though it's not precisely a fulfillment of the Psalm 83 alliance. Now, these two passages, Psalm 83 and Daniel chapter 11, continue just to tie perfectly together. Daniel 11 describes the king of the north attacking the king of the south like a whirlwind, and you zoom in on what that Hebrew word means, and there's an element of terror and ferocity, and it shows you how terrifying that attack is going to be. But it also, just like a whirlwind kind of whirls around, there's an element of surrounding, of attacking from all sides. And so based on that word alone, well, you know that then that the king of the north has regional allies, regional bases, so that it can attack radical Islam from all sides, so that it can come against these various different pockets of radical Islam from all directions. And Psalm 83 then explains more about that and how that happens and tells us, well, these are the specific allies that they have. These were written hundreds of years apart, yet these two prophecies tie together perfectly and give us this perfect picture of what is happening in the end time in the Middle East. Now, this is just the briefest summary. We have a free book, The King of the South, that will take you through this in more detail and help you prove this to yourself. And this is written for, say, a complete beginner in Bible prophecy. We're not expecting you to have a massive understanding of the Middle East or of the Bible to be able to understand this book, The King of the South. It's easily digestible, and it will help you understand all of these forecasts. And these forecasts are going to go on to really change your world. Syria switching away from Iran and towards Europe, that is a massive milestone in Bible prophecy. It will be a massive milestone in world events. It's going to lead to Europe getting more involved in the Middle East. As Mr. Flurry even indicated in his article earlier in the year, maybe it will even play a role in a strongman rising up in Europe and in Germany as Europe tries to deal with its radical Islam problems, its mass migration problems, as it worries about another wave of migrants coming in from Syria. This could be huge in the German election. This could be like this. You've got the Alternative for Deutschland party that talks a lot about migration in Germany, and really for people concerned about migration in Germany, which very valid concerns there aren't many other groups and many other parties people can turn to. And so this is going to weigh massively on the mind of German leaders. Could this swing the election? Could this change the election? Could this lead to another 5-10% boost in support for the Alternative for Deutschland? Well, if it does, that's going to make coalition formation much, much more difficult. And that's going to be a much bigger revolution for German politics. So, well, there's some strong incentive to try and deal with Syria and stop this spiraling out of control. France has played quite an active role in trying to get involved in Lebanon. Are they going to, as the former colonial power, get more involved here? There are a lot of ways that this could change your world. That's why you need this King of the South booklet, or book, I guess it is now, to understand what is happening here. And much more than that, it will help you understand the Bible. It will bring these prophecies from the Bible to life. And again, there's so many practical benefits that come from doing that. It really elevates the Bible and its power in your mind. You know, it shows that the Bible is a powerful book for right now that tells you what is happening in world events. Well, that really then elevates the importance of your own Bible study. And that as you read this book, you're knowing the power of every single word here. And it will help you dig in and apply every single word to your life, to your problems, to seeing solutions in your life. And I'll just conclude with one more scripture from this same Daniel 11 prophecy, you could say. It's actually from Daniel chapter 12, but it's the same prophecy here. And it says, "And many of them that sleep in the dust of everlasting life shall awake, some to everlasting life, some to shame and everlasting contempt. And they that be wise shall shine as the brightness of the firmament, and they that turn many to righteousness as the stars forever and ever." God really values this prophetic message. And for those that get this out and turn many to righteousness, well, God says they're going to shine as the stars forever and ever. I mean, that's a mind-blowing reward. Shine as the stars? What is that talking about? And other Bible prophecies talk about man being born into the God family, becoming God beings, having a face that shines like the stars, as it says here. God ties in the gospel message. He ties in mankind being brought into the God family, right into this passage of Bible prophecy. Ultimately, that's where all of this is leading. And that's where digging into Bible prophecy will really put our focus on the very real gospel and the good news that the Bible talks about. And that's different to the good news and what is called the gospel in churches in this world today. Digging into Bible prophecy points us to the very real hope for the world and a wonderful hope for every individual.